what's everyone been talking about lately? They've been talking about what's going to happen with the future of college football. NCAA stuff, yeah, that's over there. We can talk about that, but also the college football playoff. They've been talking about expansion. Is it going to happen again? I've been talking about that, at least on this show. Are we even going to have 12 teams? Or we're going to skip right past that? It's already old news. Let's go to 14. Let's go to 16. How's the auto bid process going to work? Who even gets an auto bid? How many auto bids do these conferences get? How many conferences are going to be left? 12 teams, 14 teams, 16 teams, and it's basically like this, right in front of your face, right? Every reporter out there at the national level is singing some version of the same chorus. And what did Meemaw always teach us, friends? Meemaw taught us when one hand's going like this in front of your face, look around the back at the other hand, because that's where the action is. So tonight, on this show, for the first time, I'm able to talk at some length about things that are being discussed behind the scenes. There's a lot going on at the college football playoff table and the future of college football table that is not being reported. And it's not being reported not necessarily because those national types don't know about it. It's not being reported because it's not time for them to run with it yet. Nor is it time for me to fully run with anything, but I got a little more leeway than they do. The key thing to remember before I dive into this, nobody knows how this is going to end. And that includes Tony Pate, the Big Ten commissioner. That includes the heads of ESPN and Fox. That includes Greg Sankey. That includes Brett Yormark. That includes any of a number of power players in the room. No single person knows how this ends. And the reason I want to make sure to stress that is because it is an environment right now that is rife or ripe. Or what's the word, Jesse? Is it rife or ripe? I always thought it was ripe. But then again, I spelled playoff berth with an I up until about 7 years ago, so what do I know? Anyway, it is a very charged environment, and it's the kind of environment where, because there's so many moving pieces, someone could walk in the room tomorrow morning when they reconvene and could put an idea on the table that could take root and it could sprout in the span of 24, 48 hours, and that could become the new thinking, just sport-wide. That's the kind of environment we're in right now. So what I believe, this is guided thinking, and I want to, again, thank a lot of our folks behind the scenes who help us out and keep us informed on this. You know who you are. I think that there are several models in play for the future of the college football playoff that have not been reported on. The hypothetical models you've seen put out there, I have not read anywhere, including things like this. I think that the Big Ten and the SEC have heard a lot of the talk out there about what an expanded playoff could potentially do to their conference championship games and their regular seasons. I have been an instrumental part in trying to make sure that particular song gets sung as loud as it can. Why? Because I love the regular season and I love Conference Championship Saturday. And if you enter into a world where your postseason model is so big that it renders a lot of the regular season irrelevant. Teams know they can lose several games and still get in, and it also renders your conference championship game irrelevant because teams look at it and say, wait a second, if I go to that game and lose, I actually would have been better off not making it and just being the 3 seed. They can't have that. They know they can't have that. Now, here is some assurance that I want to give you. They know that. It may not be that those folks and me have the same motivation, but at the end of the day, if they're motivated to crystallize value in the regular season and make sure those conference championship races and conference championship games maintain premium importance, then strange bedfellows. And so be it. So I think a lot of the decision makers in those two conferences understand we cannot sign off on any model that devalues our regular season and devalues conference championship Saturday. They're not going to sign off on that. The SEC and the Big Ten are not going to sign off on any kind of postseason format that devalues their regular season and their conference championships because there's far too much money invested in those. So while everyone you see floating around scenarios may include, a future that doesn't have conference championships, that's not what they're about to sign off on. Got that on really good authority. So the next thing that I want to suggest to you is both of these conferences are about to expand again. Everybody knows it behind the scenes. Everybody in our business knows it. The Big Ten's not standing still at whatever they're at right now. The SEC's not standing still at 16. There is almost 0% chance that they're done. And it will probably come at the expense of one of the other Power Four conferences imploding in the not-too-distant future. More on that later in the show. But when that happens, you're talking about mega conferences, 18, 20, 22 teams, however big they get. I believe both of those conferences are going to split into divisions, quadrants, if you will. And I think you'll have 4 divisions in each one of those conferences. So just hold on for a second, because I don't have visual aids with me. I don't have an easel, and I don't have a poster board, so I'm not going to draw this out for you. I want you to close your eyes, unless you're driving and you're listening to the show on Monday. I want you to close your eyes for just a second. Picture the world where the SEC is 20 teams deep. The Big Ten's 20 teams deep. And they just say, we're splitting up into 4 or 5 team divisions. Okay, what would you do from that point? If you were the SEC or ESPN, if you were the Big Ten, if you were Fox, what kind of structure would you want? Because right now, we're talking about a world, if we were to have a 12-team playoff, let's say, where you've got a certain amount of playoff games. But the thinking has always been, we've got to get through the regular season and through conference championship Saturday before we can seed the playoff, right? Just because that's the way it's been doesn't mean that's the way it has to be. And if every idea is on the table, and if nothing's decided in 2026 and beyond, what's to stop those conferences from reconfiguring their own internal structure to the point where their conference title races are part of the playoff? And the way I think about that, nothing being decided, is I think, well, if the SEC or the Big Ten had 4 divisions and they had their own little internal semifinals, Division I versus Division IV, Division II versus Division III, leading to a conference championship game, it sounds to me like you just play 2 rounds of playoffs in each conference. And I don't even know what everyone else is doing during this time. The Big 12 may be a little more robust than they are right now. They could have the same structure. But I'm thinking to myself, do we always have to live in a world where we have to get through conference championship weekend before we can start the playoff? Or is there a world where the ending of those conference seasons and the beginning of the playoff can overlap? And is there a world where the ending, the apparatus that is built into those conferences to crown their conference champ, serves as the first and or second rounds of a college football playoff? Now, does that sound unconventional? Of course it does. I think an unconventional approach is going to have to win the day because there is no conventional model. If there was, guys, they already would have agreed upon it. So the reason I feel so confident that something along these lines is happening is because really smart people involved in the process have told me, first off. Secondly, it makes sense. Thirdly, I want to remind you again, nothing's decided. And therefore, you can ask yourself a million questions. Here's my question. Where's Notre Dame fit into all that? That'd be my first question. My second question would be, hey, if the SEC and the Big Ten are going to get that big, do they even bother looking elsewhere? Do they even bother including the rest of the sport? Fingers crossed the answer is yes. I don't know what that answer would be. Because as you can clearly tell, if you got the big boys that are left in the ACC about to break away and divide themselves amongst other conferences, if Notre Dame ends up joining a conference, you have essentially college football's version of the NFC and AFC. Now, you know that I personally have believed for a long time that's the way that we're ultimately headed. And I still kind of hold that belief, but I hope against it. I hold that belief, but I hope against it. Hope to be wrong, I guess. But there is a world, as you can clearly tell, where you have 2 behemoths and they don't even have to worry about what else is left. What happens of the AAC? Don't care. What happens with the Big 12? Well, it's an inferior product. Don't care. What happens with anybody essentially west of the Great Plains that's not already in a major conference? Don't care. There's a world where that happens. I hope it doesn't come to that, but there's a world where that happens. What happens to the ACC? Very, very uncertain times there. My point in asking all these questions is don't go through the mental gymnastics of that right now, because they'll figure that stuff out. What I'm telling you is for the circumstances that are in play right now, okay, I can't hit the rewind button, in other words. So given what the landscape is right now, if we get a new proposal spit at us that includes division play in the SEC and the Big Ten that ends up being wrapped up into whatever the new version of the college football playoff is, That's a net win for me because it's a lot better than what would have been. There's also a world, obviously this is the one I'll root for, but I have doubts that it ever takes root. There is a world where the Big Ten sets itself up in 4 divisions and the SEC sets itself up in 4 divisions, and they just play through and they have themselves a little mini tournament, semifinals and finals at the end of their seasons. They crown conference champs, and then those 2 conference champs are part of a greatly reduced college football playoff field. There is a rainbow in one corner of the studio right now, several butterflies in the other corner of the studio. That's probably fantasy land on my part. I think it's been proposed. I think it's on the table at least. So there is pretty much everything still up in the air. There's nothing decided. Still everything up in the air. But I just want you to know that while there were, as far as I could tell, a few pretty similarly floated proposals last week from a lot of the big boys who were covering this and doing a great job covering it, I think there are several other proposals that never saw the light of day, and those are the proposals that actually have the most steam behind the scenes. But knowing who you have to get to sign off on these things to make it happen, there's still so much up in the air. And then you have the added maybe conundrum of, well, what if everyone doesn't sign off on it? At what point do the SEC and Big Ten look around and say, forget this, we're out? And is that possible? Or does that get litigious, which is a fancy word for lawyers come in and just mess everything up? I don't know. I don't know. 3 of the most important words you could say right now. I guess 4 if you don't count the contraction. I don't know. I do not know. But I know it has to happen very quickly. Very quickly. See, this is the good news, I guess, in all this. We don't have to watch it drag out because 2026 is less than 24 months away, according to Stats and Info. And they've got to get this thing done well ahead of time. Guys, this would bore you, and I'm going to spend 5 seconds on it. Do you know how much legwork has to be done once you get a format approved? Just think about things like advertising sales. Think about things like carriage rights. Think about things if you were to allocate where teams play and who's in a division in your conferences, you got to redo your schedules. And then also you got to determine, are we going to go by rankings when we seed our playoff, or are we going to go by winners of the various divisions within our conferences? Yeah, sounds fun, doesn't it? No, it sounds like a nightmare logistically. So that's not for us to worry about. I just wanted to let you know, a lot of wheels turning, and not every one of them has light shown on it right now, but I think they will.